Welcome back to WCB Jazz Vinyl. Did you know that in 1962, Blue Note signed exclusive recording contracts with two female vocalists who each put out a single album? Both of those were recorded at Rudy Van Gelder's studio. They were pressed by Plastilite, have all the hallmarks of great Blue Note albums. But following the release of these two albums, Blue Note abandoned the idea. So that's what I want to talk about today, is how did this come to be? Why is it these albums sort of got lost in the shuffle? Before we dive in, as always, hit like, hit subscribe. You can hit that notification bell. It'll actually let you know every time that I post a new video. And of course, you can follow me on Instagram anyway, at what_can_brown. All right, so let's talk about these two albums. I personally was excited to pull these out of the shelves. It has been a while since I've played them. So the first one that I want to talk about, again, there's just two. This is probably going to be a shorter, we'll see, maybe shorter video. So this is by Dodo, Greene, and the title is My Hour of Need. Now, it's possible, I'm sure many of you are aware of these two albums, but I don't think anybody's really addressed them in any level of detail, at least that I could find. Certainly on YouTube. So I wanted to do it, and again, like these aren't perfect albums. Like maybe there's a reason or two why they're not as well regarded perhaps as the rest of Blue Note's output in 1962, but we'll get into that. So this is My Hour of Need anyway. Great, absolutely great photo, and very much in the style of Blue Note, right? Especially in terms of in terms of the font, and so funnily enough, actually, the designers here, you do have Francis Wolff as a photographer, but a guy named Larry Miller is the designer of the album cover. So let's see what to say about this album. I mean, just to kind of orient you again, this was recorded in April of 1962. Again, it was at the Rudy Van Gelder studio, and it features vocalist Dodo Greene alongside the Ike Quebec Quintet. Now, Ike Quebec at this time was the A&R man for the label, I do believe. He didn't hand off that responsibility until his death when Duke Pearson took over. So it is very possible that Ike Quebec had something to do with bringing Dodo Greene to the label, because that was one of his jobs, essentially, was to find, scout talent and then find the backing bands to support them. So who Ike Quebec assembled for this session included Grant Greene, Sir Charles Thompson, Milt Hinton, and actually Herbie Lewis. The two of them traded off on bass. And then you have Al Harewood and Billy Higgins that traded off on drums. So very interesting. Who was Dodo Greene? Well, she was born Dorothea Hawkins in 1924. Earlier in her career, she did have the opportunity to actually sit in as a vocalist with a Cozy Coles band. Apparently, she then asked if she could join, and her request was turned down. But either way, that experience supposedly gave her the confidence to pursue her career in music. Now, this was not the first album that she put out. She did record an album for Time Records, I think it was the year prior, but this album, My Hour of Need, was her only other one that she was recorded on. So the liner notes here, so this is fortunate when for some of these albums that really were basically one-off or sort of lost albums in terms of people not really talking about them. There's a lot that we can get from the liner notes, and sometimes that's the only thing we can get. So the liner notes here describe that it's the first time that a vocalist had been signed to an exclusive contract since Blue Note's founding in 1939. And for this exclusive contract, and because it's a female vocalist, they actually broke it out separately from the rest of the Blue Note catalog. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when I talk about Blue Note and I talk about the eras, there's the 1500 series, right, which is all the albums that started with 15. Then there's the 4000 series, 4100, 4200, etc. This is actually catalog number 9001. So very interesting. Definitely felt like it was the start of something different for Blue Note. And what we'll find throughout the course of my discussion is that there really was just the two in this series. Now, this wasn't the first time that anyone had sung on a Blue Note album. There was Benny Greene, who sung on at least one, I think multiple of his albums. And then let's see, there was a few singles put out by Leon Eason, and there's a couple of other things, I think, in 45 RPM single where you had a vocalist supporting, say, Horace Silver, Jimmy Smith. think I addressed some of this in my entire video that is just on Blue Note singles. But in any event, this was the first time that there was a vocalist that was sort of the the pivotal element of the album. And just as an aside, because I actually did get this from a radio station collection, and it really didn't look like it had much play on it, and so in terms of the condition of the record. So I just wanted to point out that despite the fact that this is the 9000 series, and that's unusual to say, especially when there's just 2 albums, I did want to point out that it still came in the same type of sleeve. And actually, I even want to say that both of these albums that I'm discussing at some point appeared in here in terms of images. And so again, many of you who are interested in Blue Note and passionate about the label, probably aware that these albums exist, but maybe you haven't come across them or haven't heard them. So, then of course, in addition to that, obviously the label is going to be the same here, right? Same style and everything, but you'll notice BLP 9001. Otherwise, you of course have the Plastilite ear. It does have 9M. It has Van Gelder stamp in it because it was 1962 and they had recently stopped using the RVG, right? So it's just Van Gelder. So one other thing that I wanted to mention before I talk just a second about the music as well is that there was actually another session that Dodo Greene recorded for Blue Note at Rudy Van Gelder's as well. So about 5 months after the 2 sessions that produced this album, remember I mentioned there was a drummer and a bassist that kind of traded in and out because there were actually 2 sessions for this album. Well, there was a 3rd session as well, but that one was shelved. So it did apparently show up on a CD reissue, I think in the 90s, but and that may be the only way still to hear it. It's possible the digital tracks are out there. But I just wanted to mention that 3rd session, again, that was shelved, the lineup on that one included Wendell Marshall, I think it's Jewel Curtis, John Assia, I don't know how to pronounce some of these, Eddie Chambly, and then Edwin Swanston were subbing in for some of the folks. So I think the folks that supported this session, perhaps a little bit more recognizable names. So this album just must not have sold well. And I guess the only way that I know that, and I don't have the numbers obviously in terms of sales, but one of the ways that we know this is that well, they stopped after these 2 albums, that they didn't release that shelf session that Dodo Greene recorded later. And the interesting thing is that this album, Blue Note put a little bit of muscle behind it to try to promote it. So they put out 3 separate singles, so 45 RPM singles. I think I at least have 2 of them that supported this album. So they would have been sent out to, I guess primarily jukeboxes. I don't think they were sending 45 RPM singles to radio stations. I think they were sending the full albums at that time. I could be wrong. I'm not the the all-knowing historian, but it's interesting that they would put out these 3 singles and then, essentially this opportunity for Dodo Greene to kind of evaporate. So, otherwise, what do we know about this album? Well, the Downbeat review at the time gave it just 2.5 stars. So what they suggested actually, though, is that they said by throwing out the organ and the arrangements that there might be a basis to record Greene. The reviewer further suggests that they thought it was an attempt by Blue Note to sort of enter the rock and roll genre and sort of be more appealing outside of jazz, which I think is harsh, but it's also inaccurate. This to me does come across as sort of soul jazz in flavor, in style. I think that that Dodo Greene has a really nice voice actually, and I think that she does a great job. Even though there's 10 tracks here and they're shorter. There's not as many solos. I mean, you'll get some from Ike Quebec and Grant Green here, but the soloists are not the star of the show. It's definitely Greene, and I actually do enjoy a number of these tracks. I really like My Hour of Need, which is the title track. It opens it. There was also a single for My Hour of Need. You Are My Sunshine, I think, has a lot of her character in it that just, I don't know, it's like a very fun kind of swinging rendition of You Are My Sunshine. Very 60s, I will say. And I don't know. I don't know if reviewers thought it was too hokey or maybe audiences did as well. and maybe just not what they expected to hear from a Blue Note session. It kind of makes you wonder that, if she'd recorded this for another label, if there had been a different outcome. So despite the 2.5 stars, I actually do enjoy this album. It sounds great in mono. It's, again, it's got that RVG sound, 60s sound. It's one that you want to turn up. It was well recorded. It's not like just because this was the first vocalist album for Blue Note doesn't mean that it was the first time that Rudy Van Gelder had been recording vocalists. So everything about it, I think, is really fun. I think it's a very worthwhile addition to the label, and I do think that it deserves more attention. All right, so conversely, all right, this one I don't like quite as much, and I'll sort of get into why. So this second one is titled Portrait of Sheila by Sheila Jordan. So this was also recorded in 1962 at the Van Gelder studio. And, I mentioned the 9001. Well, of course, this one must be 9002. So this is very different just across the board than the Dodo Greene session. So this one features Barry Galbraith on guitar, Steve Swallow on bass, and Denzel Best on drums. There's no piano here, and there's no horns. So the feeling is that aside from the vocalist, the only melodic instrument here is the guitar. And I think that it creates this really nice and intimate vibe on this album. It's one of the reasons why I really like Witch albums. There's the Gil Mallet album, Patterns, right? That's kind of more intimate. But I've also talked about this within the context of other female vocalists, like some of those Chris Connor records on Bethlehem that I think without the piano just add this really nice kind of quiet, like guitar heavy, moody kind of thing. And there definitely is that vibe here. So who was Sheila Jordan? More recognizable name for sure than Dodo Greene. So Sheila Jordan, okay, so she was Duke Jordan's ex-wife, but I'd be foolish to leave it at that because she was much more than that, and she really became more of a recognizable artist well after she left Jordan, which might have actually been around the same time as this album, by the way. Leaving Duke Jordan, that is. So she had been on the scene for a while. I think even Charlie Parker had good things to say about her. She had been on the scene and very sort of experienced and talented vocalist, just not recorded until this album as a leader. And I think the only album that she was recorded on prior to this, even though she wasn't a leader, was Peter In's Looking Out, which is kind of a lesser known album, but perhaps worth looking into. So she would also sort of have a much more extensive career than Dodo Greene. Dodo Greene kind of faded off into obscurity, at least in terms of recording. She would stay on the scene until at the very end. I think in the early 2000s, I think she was still performing. It's just that she sort of left the music scene. Sheila Jordan very much stayed in the music scene. So again, 9002 is the catalog number, and this was indeed the last time that they would use that 9000 series. And I think it sort of further suggests that neither one of these albums probably sold. And it does make you wonder if there was a Blue Note 9003 maybe that was recorded, but then they decided to just pull the plug and never release it. But who knows? I don't think there's any evidence to say that actually did happen. Okay, so about this album and why I think it's perhaps not as good as Dodo's. The material here I would call uneven to say the least. Now, I understand that musicians and artists and singers can have different styles, and they can leverage certain things that aren't necessarily traditional, but make it a part of their toolkit, right? And make it part of who they the uniqueness of them as a singer. However, Sheila here does not always hit the notes that she is apparently shooting for, and it's obvious. So as good as the backing band is here, I think her whispered and kind of soft style works really, really well when she's on key, but she isn't always on key. And I mean almost in every song she's not on key all the time. And here's the thing, again, I could say, well, guess what? That's her style. It was 1962. There's a lot of different things going on with vocalists and with other instrumentalists who were trying different things and doing atonal things. So I can't say this for 100% certainty, but what I will say is that there's a downbeat review of the album and they could be just as biased as perhaps I'm being, but they gave it 4 stars despite saying some of the things that I just said about both her delivery as well as her pitchiness. And the reviewer stated that he really liked seeing her live and that she didn't have any of these issues even on some of the same songs. And so the reviewer suggested that, speculated that it was like the pressure of the recording process that might have led to so many issues with her pitchiness. So the problem that I have with everything that I just said is Blue Note was fairly meticulous. They were pretty specific about what they were going to release. And they obviously had plenty of opportunity to shelve sessions and refuse to put things out. Everyone at the label must have been aware of this, right? So it's very interesting to me that her kind of delivery style here, and how obvious it is that she's not hitting, she's mostly in tune, but then very much not at all. And so I just find it very curious. So, what to say about, I guess, this album, given some of these issues? I mean, like I said, I don't like it as much as Dodo Greene's, and it is because of the pitchiness, but I really like the instrumental backing, and I do think there's a lot of great elements to it. I'm the sort of person that I feel like that I try to give artists the benefit of the doubt. They put out a statement, and that's what they intended, especially when you kind of have some checks and balances at a label like Blue Note. What I will say is that we have the rest of Sheila Jordan's, discography as evidence of her style. And to be fair, I don't know. I actually don't think that she recorded, and now I'm going to actually have to, obviously I'm going to have to double check, but her next album as a leader wasn't until the 70s, and she wasn't recording in that way. She wasn't leveraging that kind of atonality. Now, she did continue, however, to stay a little bit connected to some of the more sort of experimental scene just a little bit. So she performed, I want to say, on a Carla Bley record. She did something with George Russell, who was kind of known for experimenting a little bit with, especially in terms of arrangements. So I just don't know. Because when I followed up on her next album as a leader, which was in like the mid 70s on the East Wind label, it wasn't like this. So anyway, it kind of is what it is. It's very apparent that neither of these albums sold well, and I'd love to be able to find something that would back it up, or some type of commentary or anything like that. That might be out there in terms of any written accounts or something, just because I don't know, and because there's a little bit of mystique around these 2 albums. That's why I wanted to bring them forward for this video, because I don't know that much about them, and it doesn't seem like there's much written about them. We do have a couple of these reviews, including 4 stars for this one, and 2.5 kind of goes against my my thoughts, but obviously I'm just one voice, right? But I find it fascinating that Blue Note had this period of time where they were trying something different. They put these 2 albums out there, and that was it in terms of vocalists, at least for a time, right? Because after the sale to Liberty, things kind of Liberty and then United Artists, things kind of went in different directions. So in any event, I'm curious what other people think about this. Perhaps this is new news for some of you, or perhaps maybe it's just a little bit more commentary on these albums that otherwise haven't been commented that much about. So, gonna leave it at that. Perhaps that was a short video. Can't tell yet. Thanks everyone for sticking with me, and I'll see you next time.